The Galactic Empire had ruled for millennia, its authority an unshakable monolith of order and brutality. It was an empire of thousands of worlds, governed by a rigid hierarchy where strength dictated survival. Every planet within its grasp knew the cost of disobedience: swift, merciless annihilation. The Empire's doctrine was simple: compliance ensured prosperity, defiance warranted extinction. It had crushed countless rebellions, shattered civilizations that dared question its supremacy, and left behind only dust and whispers of those who had once dreamed of freedom. Earth had joined the Empire reluctantly, a small but technologically advanced world with a stubborn spirit. Humanity had been a curiosity at first, feisty, intelligent, and more resourceful than most species the Empire had subjugated. Though their entry into imperial society had been tense, Earth had chosen diplomacy over war, assimilation over destruction. Their fleets had been impressive but no match for the vast armadas of the Empire. Their scientists had been brilliant, yet imperial oversight had stifled their most dangerous innovations. For decades, humanity had obeyed, enduring the cold bureaucracy of their overlords with calculated patience. But no empire, no matter how vast, could predict the consequences of arrogance. The incident began on the core world of Velther Prime, a city world gleaming with towering spires and labyrinthine streets. Here, in the heart of imperial dominion, a 12-year-old human boy named Alex Carter was arrested. He was small, with unkempt blonde hair and bright, curious eyes that saw the universe as a puzzle waiting to be solved. He was the son of a Terran diplomat stationed on Velther Prime, a child raised on stories of humanity's resilience and ingenuity. It was that curiosity that led him into trouble. He had wandered too far, slipping past an automated security checkpoint meant to keep civilians away from classified areas. It had been a harmless mistake, an innocent child's misstep into a place he did not belong. But the Empire did not recognize innocence. The security enforcers, cold and unyielding, seized him at once. There was no trial, no discussion. The charge was treason, unlawful trespass into a restricted zone. The punishment was death. News of Alex's arrest reached Earth within hours. The Terran government reacted with immediate outrage, dispatching diplomatic envoys and pleas for clemency. Surely, they argued, the execution of a child was a mistake, a misinterpretation of imperial law. Even among the most brutal regimes in galactic history, there had always been a line, a distinction between criminals and the truly innocent. But the Empire did not negotiate. The response was a single transmission, a stark declaration from the Imperial High Council. Humanity will learn that the law does not discriminate. A lesson must be taught. The execution was scheduled for the next cycle, an event to be broadcast across the Empire as a demonstration of unwavering justice. On Earth, a storm of fury erupted. In the streets of every major city, millions gathered in protest, demanding action. The United Terran Command convened in emergency session, its highest-ranking officials deliberating in hushed, frantic tones. Diplomacy had failed. Negotiation had been spat upon. For the first time in history, humanity felt the weight of powerlessness, the knowledge that their words meant nothing to an empire that saw them as lesser. Alex Carter died at dawn. The execution was efficient, clinical. He was brought before a silent assembly, shackled and pale, his small frame dwarfed by the towering figures of his executioners. His final moments were transmitted across the Empire, his eyes filled not with fear, but with something else: understanding, defiance. The plasma blade fell, and with it, the last restraint that had bound humanity to peace. The silence that followed was not submission. It was the inhale before the scream, the moment before the fire consumes the world. The first response came within hours. Earth severed all diplomatic ties with the Empire, withdrawing its envoys and recalling every citizen stationed in imperial space. Next came the mobilization. Orbital shipyards, long dormant under imperial restrictions, roared to life as entire fleets began to take shape. Factories that had once produced civilian goods were repurposed for war, forging weapons unseen by the galaxy. AI-driven warships, stealth cruisers with quantum shielding, and kinetic bombardment platforms, all projects hidden beneath layers of misdirection and secrecy, waiting for the day they would be needed. That day had come. Across the empire, whispers of the execution spread. But something else spread alongside them, a realization, a tremor in the foundation of imperial rule. Other species, long cowed by fear, watched humanity with a mixture of horror and hope. Could it be done? Could the unbreakable empire be defied? And then the first attack came. A single imperial patrol fleet near the Sol system was erased in an instant. No warning, no mercy. Sensors detected a disturbance, then nothing. When reinforcements arrived, they found only debris and silence. The Empire had seen uprisings before. It had seen rebellions rise and fall like dying embers. But this was not rebellion. This was vengeance. This was the fury of a species wronged beyond measure. A force unleashed not for conquest, but for eradication. Humanity did not seek to negotiate. It did not send warnings or ultimatums. It moved with the precision of a surgeon and the wrath of a god. In the span of weeks, key imperial outposts fell. Supply lines burned. Tactical AI systems, long thought impenetrable, collapsed under cyber assaults that rewrote entire networks in seconds. The Empire, for the first time in its history, faltered. The High Council convened in a desperate bid to understand what had gone wrong. Humanity was supposed to be weak, controlled. Their technology was advanced, yes, but their military had been inferior. Or so they had thought. What they had failed to realize, what no one had realized, was that Earth had never stopped preparing. Every restriction the Empire had imposed, every limitation placed upon humanity, had been an illusion. While the Empire had believed them tamed, humanity had built in the shadows. Technologies forbidden by imperial decree had been perfected in secret. Weapons deemed too dangerous for galactic warfare had been stockpiled in hidden vaults. The Empire had believed itself omnipotent, but Earth had never trusted peace to last. And so the war began. It was not a war for territory, nor for independence. It was a war for reckoning. As the first imperial worlds fell to the firestorm of Earth's wrath, one message was broadcast back to the heart of the Empire. A simple transmission, carrying a voice filled with cold, unshakable resolve. You took one of ours. We will take all of yours. The first strike had been surgical, devastating, and absolute. The Empire had no chance to react before its patrol fleets along the Sol corridor vanished into burning wreckage. It was not a declaration of war. It was an execution, an answer to the crime they had committed. Earth had spent decades hiding its true strength, and now it was unleashing it without restraint. Imperial admirals, long accustomed to sluggish bureaucratic responses and calculated political maneuvering, found themselves facing an enemy that struck with cold efficiency and a level of technological sophistication they had never encountered before. The battle reports were horrifying. Entire supply chains disrupted in a matter of days. Communication hubs dismantled with precision strikes. Imperial fleet commands, once thought invincible, rendered blind and leaderless in the chaos. Earth's forces did not engage in prolonged skirmishes or seek to claim territory. They annihilated targets with overwhelming force and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The Empire, vast as it was, had never faced an enemy that fought without hesitation, without fear, and without mercy. Grand Admiral Threxus Velker stood in the war chambers of the Imperial High Command, staring at the projected star map where systems flickered red with each lost stronghold. He was a veteran of 100 campaigns, a strategist whose name alone had sent lesser species into submission. But for the first time in his long career, he felt something foreign crawl up his spine. Uncertainty. They are ghosts. One of his fleet captains muttered. They strike and vanish. They do not move like any force we have faced before. Velker's golden eyes narrowed. The arrogance that had been the foundation of the Empire was crumbling beneath him. Humanity had been underestimated, no, miscalculated. The Empire had seen their diplomacy as submission, their obedience as weakness. It had never considered that their compliance had been nothing more than patience, waiting for the day their fury could be unleashed. They are not ghosts, Velker said at last. They are reapers. The Empire's counterattack was swift and brutal. Velker himself led the retaliation, deploying entire war fleets toward key Terran-occupied sectors. The Empire had numbers on its side, its armadas stretching across the stars like an unbreakable tide. Against any other species, the overwhelming force would have been enough to crush the resistance before it had time to gain momentum. But against humanity it was a slaughter, just not in the way the Empire had expected. The first engagement near the Myrick Expanse was meant to be an overwhelming show of force. A fleet of 2,000 warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything Earth had ever fielded in open combat, descended upon a known Terran staging ground. It was a calculated trap. Imperial commanders believed they had pinpointed one of humanity's primary bases, and if they struck hard enough, they could break the back of the uprising before it escalated further. They were wrong. The moment the fleet arrived, they found nothing but silence. No transmissions, no defensive formations, no sign of enemy presence at all. Confusion rippled through the ranks until the first ship exploded. It came from nowhere, an invisible force that shredded through hull plating like paper. Then another detonation, and another. The Empire's warships flailed, firing blind into the void, but their weapons found nothing. Their shields, designed to withstand traditional energy-based warfare, collapsed under the sheer kinetic force of hyper-accelerated projectiles. Imperial vessels vanished in brilliant infernos, torn apart by weapons that defied conventional countermeasures. Then humanity's fleet appeared, not from the front where the Empire had expected, but from all sides, above, below, within the very shadows of the gas giant that loomed over the battlefield. Their ships did not follow traditional formations. They adapted mid-battle, shifting in unpredictable patterns, each vessel acting not as part of a rigid command structure, but as a free-thinking predator. AI-assisted targeting systems calculated attack vectors faster than any Imperial officer could react. In less than an hour, the entire Imperial fleet was gone, reduced to smoldering debris drifting lifelessly through space. The battle was never a battle. It was an execution. Word spread like wildfire. Humanity was not just resisting. It was dismantling the Empire piece by piece. The myth of Imperial invincibility shattered with each lost engagement, and across the galaxy, whispers of rebellion began to stir. On occupied worlds, oppressed species took notice. The Trelvans, whose homeworld had been glassed a century ago for daring to demand autonomy, began launching strikes against Imperial governors. The Kalari, whose culture had been systematically erased by Imperial edicts, rose in open defiance. Even those who had once served the Empire out of fear now hesitated. If humanity could defy the unstoppable, then perhaps the Empire was not so unstoppable after all. The High Council, long detached from the realities of war, panicked. They had seen rebellions before, but none like this. This was not an uprising. This was extermination. If they did not act swiftly, they would lose everything. Velker was given full authority, no political interference, no bureaucratic delay. The Empire would crush Earth before the contagion of defiance spread any further. But even as he commanded the mobilization of the largest fleet ever assembled, Velker knew it would not be enough. Humanity was not merely fighting for survival. It was fighting for vengeance. And vengeance did not negotiate. As the Imperial fleet gathered for its counteroffensive, a final message arrived from Earth. It was not a plea, not a surrender. It was a simple statement, broadcast on every Imperial frequency, in every language known to the galaxy. You have made an enemy that will not stop. Velker read the words in silence, his jaw tightening as he watched the last of his warships depart for battle. The war was no longer about dominance. It was about survival. The Imperial capital burned. Velker stood at the window of the war chamber, his golden eyes reflecting the ruin that had befallen the once glistening spires of Velther Prime. The cityscape, once a beacon of the Empire's dominance, had transformed into a graveyard of shattered towers and spiraling plumes of smoke. The planetary defense grid, a marvel of engineering that had never fallen to an enemy assault, now lay in smoldering wreckage, its core systems hijacked and turned against their masters. The invincible fleets that had once stretched across the stars as an unbreakable wall had been sundered, their remains drifting through the void like the bones of long-forgotten gods. Humanity had come, and it had not come for conquest. It had come for an ending. The attack had begun at the edges of the Imperial core worlds, moving inward with relentless precision. Humanity's war machine did not pause. It did not rest. It struck at supply lines, shattered communication hubs, and disabled navigational beacons, plunging the Empire's logistical infrastructure into chaos. Where the Empire had once dictated the flow of war, now it reeled, desperately attempting to regroup against an enemy that adapted faster than they could react. Every attempt at counteroffensive had failed, crushed beneath Earth's superior tactics, its AI-driven warships, and its unwavering will to see the Empire reduced to dust. Velker had fought countless enemies in his long career, but never had he encountered one so devoid of fear. Humanity did not fight like a civilization seeking survival. It fought like a force of nature, a storm that swept across the galaxy without mercy. And now they were here. The first wave of Terran assault forces had breached the lower districts of the capital within hours of planetary fall. The skies, once filled with the elegance of Imperial dreadnoughts, now roared with the thunder of drop pods and gunships. The streets ran red as Imperial soldiers, once the iron fist of the galaxy, fell before the precision fire of humanity's elite. Their armor, once believed impenetrable, crumpled beneath kinetic rounds designed to pierce the hulls of warships. Their formations, once a symbol of order, collapsed into frantic retreats. But it was not just Earth's military that had come. They were not alone. The Trelvans, long thought broken, descended from orbit in stolen Imperial frigates, turning their own weapons against them. The Kalari, their songs of war echoing through the ruined corridors of the Imperial Palace, fought with a vengeance only a species that had known the pain of extinction could wield. Even those who had once served the Empire out of fear now turned their weapons on their former masters. The fall of Velther Prime was not merely a Terran victory. It was the unmaking of an empire. Velker's grip tightened around the edge of the war table as the final report scrolled across the holo display. Entire regiments lost. Command centers overrun. The last remnants of the Empire's ruling elite attempting to flee the system, only to be cut down before they could breach orbit. The Imperial High Council, once a body of absolute authority, now lay in lifeless heaps within the Grand Chamber, executed before they could even utter a plea for mercy. He had known this moment would come. From the moment the child was executed, he had known. The doors behind him hissed open. He did not turn. He already knew who stood there. "You were the only one who fought well," a voice said. It was a human voice, calm, unshaken by the destruction around them. It carried no triumph, no arrogance, only finality. Velker exhaled slowly. "If I had fought well," he said, "I would not be standing here in defeat." He turned to face them. The figure before him wore armor crafted in the dark blues and blacks of the United Terran Command, its surface marred with the scars of battle. A commander, one of their finest. Their helmet remained on, the visor an opaque reflection of the burning capital outside. "There is no victory in this," Velker said. The commander tilted their head slightly. "That depends on where you stand." A distant explosion rocked the chamber, and for a moment, neither spoke. The city was dying. The Empire was dying. Velker exhaled and closed his eyes. "It should not have ended this way." "It ended the only way it could," the commander replied. "You thought you could teach us a lesson. Instead, you taught us what it means to be without restraint." There was no malice in their words, no anger, only truth. Velker let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "And what now?" For the first time, the human hesitated. Earth had not come to rule. It had not come to replace the Empire with another empire. It had come for vengeance, and vengeance had been served. But now, as the ashes settled, the weight of what had been done pressed against them all. "You were a soldier," the commander said at last. "Not a tyrant, not a monster, just a man who fought for his people." Velker's gaze flickered with something unreadable. "And what will you do with a soldier?" The commander raised their weapon, leveling it with Velker's chest. For the first time since the war began, the admiral closed his eyes. A single shot rang out. When the commander lowered their weapon, the last remnant of the old empire lay motionless upon the war chamber floor. The war was over. In the days that followed, the galaxy watched as humanity did what no species had done before. It did not claim the throne of the fallen empire. It did not declare dominion over the broken worlds left in the wake of its wrath. Instead, it stepped back. It let the shattered remnants of civilization rise on their own terms. It offered guidance, protection, but never rule. The message was clear. Never again. The galaxy would remember. The stars would remember. And should any power ever rise again with the cruelty of the empire, they too would remember the name of the world that had burned an empire to the ground for a single child. Earth. The stars above Velther Prime were quiet. Where once imperial warships had patrolled in endless formations, now there was only debris, drifting lifelessly in the void. The war was over. The empire was gone. But peace did not follow in its wake, only silence. Commander Elias Voss stood on the observation deck of the Erebus, his gaze fixed on the ruined planet below. The fires had begun to die, leaving behind a skeletal world, its cities reduced to shattered husks. He had seen many battlefields in his time, but none like this. There was no sense of victory here, no triumphant banners or celebrations. Humanity had won, but in doing so, it had proven something far more terrifying. The galaxy now knew what happened when Earth was wronged. The door behind him hissed open. Captain Mira Sato stepped onto the deck, her face drawn and weary. "The last of the resistance has surrendered," she said quietly. "Velther Prime is secured." Secured. A cold, clinical word for what had just transpired. Elias nodded, but did not turn. "Casualties?" Mira hesitated. "Lower than expected. Their forces were broken before we even reached the palace. Most of the fighting was symbolic. They knew they had lost." Elias exhaled, his breath fogging against the reinforced glass. He had fought for years, planned this campaign down to its final moments. Every strike, every maneuver had been calculated with ruthless efficiency. And yet, standing here now, he felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. "They would have done the same to us," Mira said, as if sensing his thoughts. "I know." His voice was quiet. "But that doesn't make it any less final." Mira was silent for a long moment. Then she stepped closer. "Command wants to know our next move. There's a power vacuum now. Without the Empire, the entire structure of the galaxy is unstable." Elias finally turned to face her. "We didn't come to rule, Mira." "Maybe not, but someone will." Her dark eyes searched his. "And if it isn't us, it'll be another empire. Maybe worse than the last one." That was the reality of it. Humanity had not fought for conquest, but in destroying the old order, they had left something even more dangerous in its place: uncertainty. The empire had been cruel, but it had been stable. Now chaos loomed. Every world once held in its grip would need to decide its own fate. Some would rise, others would collapse, and some, Elias knew, would seek revenge. "The Senate will convene soon," Mira continued. "There's already talk of a coalition, maybe even a council of independent worlds. But there are others who think we should seize control while we can." Elias looked back at the broken planet below. "And you? What do you think?" Mira hesitated. "I think we changed the galaxy, but I don't know if it was for the better." The words hung between them. A soft chime interrupted the silence. An incoming transmission. Mira tapped her wrist console, and a familiar voice filled the room. "This is Admiral Halstead. Commander Voss, report to the war room immediately." Elias exchanged a glance with Mira. There was no rest, no time to dwell on what had been done. The galaxy was still shifting, still deciding what it would become in the wake of the Empire's fall. And Earth, whether it wanted to or not, was now at the center of it. Elias took one last look at the dying world beneath him. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the door.